on the inconveniences resulting from being hanged by Charles Lamb. 1810, text of 1818. To the editor of the Reflector. Sir, I am one of those unhappy persons whose misfortunes, it seems, do not entitle them to the benefit of pure pity. All that is bestowed upon me of that kindest alleviator of human miseries comes dashed with a double portion of contempt. My griefs have nothing in them that is felt as sacred by the bystanders, yet is my affliction in truth of the deepest grain, the heaviest task that was ever given to mortal patience to sustain. Time, that wears out all other sorrows, can never modify or soften mine. Here they must continue to gnaw, as long as that fatal mark. Why was I ever born? Why was innocence in my person suffered to be branded with a stain which was appointed only for the blackest guilt? What had I done, or my parents, that a disgrace of mine should involve a whole posterity in infamy? I am almost tempted to believe that in some pre-existent state, crimes to which this sublunary life of mine hath been as much a stranger as the babe that is newly PG 66 born into it, have drawn down upon me this vengeance, so disproportionate to my actions on this globe. My brain sickens, and my bosom labours to be delivered of the weight that presses upon it, yet my conscious pen shrinks from the avowal, but out it must. Oh, Mr. Reflector, guess at the wretch's misery who now writes this to you when, with tears and burning blushes, he is obliged to confess that he has been hanged. Methinks I hear an involuntary exclamation burst from you, as your imagination presents to you fearful images of your correspondent unknown, hanged. Fear not, Mr. Editor. No disembodied spirit has the honor of addressing you. I am flesh and blood, an unfortunate system of bones, muscles, sinews, arteries like yourself. Then I presume you mean to be pleasant. That expression of yours, Mr. Correspondent, must be taken somehow in a metaphorical sense. In the plainest sense, without trope or figure. Yes, Mr. Editor. This neck of mine has felt the fatal noose. These hands have tremblingly held up the corroborative prayer book. These lips have sucked the moisture of the last consolatory orange. This tongue has chaunted the doleful cantata which no performer was ever called upon to repeat. This face has had the veiling nightcap drawn over it. But for no crime of mine. Far be it from me to arraign the justice of my country, which, though tardy, did at length recognize my innocence. It is not for me to reflect upon judge or jury, now that 11 years have elapsed since the erroneous sentence was pronounced. Men will always be fallible, and perhaps circumstances did appear at the time a little strong. Suffice it to say that after hanging 4 minutes, as the spectators were pleased to compute it, a man that is being strangled, I know from experience, has altogether a different measure of time from his friends who are breathing leisurely about him. I suppose the minutes lengthen as time approaches eternity, in the same manner as the miles get longer as you travel northward. After hanging 4 minutes, according to the best calculation of the bystanders, a reprieve came, and I was cut down. Really, I am ashamed of deforming your pages with these PG 67 technical phrases, if I knew how to express my meaning shorter. But to proceed, my first care after I had been brought to myself by the usual methods, those methods that are so interesting to the operator and his assistants, who are pretty numerous on such occasions, but which no patient was ever desirous of undergoing a second time for the benefit of science, my first care was to provide myself with an enormous stock, or cravat to hide the place. You understand me. My next care was to procure a residence as distant as possible from that part of the country where I had suffered. For that reason I chose the metropolis, as the place where wounded honor, I had been told, could lurk with the least danger of exciting enquiry, and stigmatized innocence had the best chance of hiding her disgrace in a crowd. I sought out a new circle of acquaintance, and my circumstances happily enabling me to pursue my fancy in that respect, I endeavoured, by mingling in all the pleasures which the town affords, to efface the memory of what I had undergone. But alas, such is the portentous and all-pervading chain of connection which links together the head and members of this great community, my scheme of lying perdu was defeated almost at the outset. A countryman of mine, whom a foolish lawsuit had brought to town, by chance met me, and the secret was soon blazoned about. In a short time I found myself deserted by most of those who had been my intimate friends. Not that any guilt was supposed to attach to my character. My officious countryman, to do him justice, had been candid enough to explain my perfect innocence, but somehow or other, there is a want of strong virtue in mankind. We have plenty of the softer instincts, but the heroic character is gone. How else can I account for it, that of all my numerous acquaintance, among whom I had the honour of ranking sundry persons of education, talents, and worth, scarcely here and there one or two could be found, who had the courage to associate with a man that had been hanged. Those few who did not desert me altogether were persons of strong but coarse minds, and from the absence of all delicacy in them, I suffered almost as much as from the superabundance of a false species of it in the others. Those who stuck by me were the jokers, who thought themselves PG 68, entitled by the fidelity which they had shewn towards me to use me with what familiarity they pleased. Many and unfeeling are the jests that I have suffered from these rude, because faithful, Achateses. As they passed me in the streets, one would nod significantly to his companion and say, pointing to me, smoke his cravat, and ask me if I had got a wen that I was so solicitous to cover my neck. Another would enquire what news from assizes, which you may guess, Mr. Editor, was the scene of my shame, and whether the sessions was like to prove a maiden one. A third would offer to insure me from drowning. A fourth would tease me with inquiries how I felt when I was swinging, whether I had not something like a blue flame dancing before my eyes. A fifth took a fancy never to call me anything but Lazarus, and an eminent bookseller and publisher, who, in his zeal to present the public with new facts, had he lived in those days, I am confident, would not have scrupled waiting upon the person himself last mentioned, at the most critical period of his existence, to solicit a few facts relative to resuscitation, had the modesty to offer me guineas per sheet, if I would write in his magazine a physiological account of my feelings upon coming to myself. But these were evils which a moderate fortitude might have enabled me to struggle with. Alas, Mr. Editor, the women, whose good graces I had always most assiduously cultivated, from whose softer minds I had hoped a more delicate and generous sympathy than I found in the men, the women begun to shun me. This was the unkindest blow of all. But is it to be wondered at? How couldst thou imagine, wretchedest of beings, that that tender creature Seraphina would fling her pretty arms about that neck, which previous circumstances had rendered infamous, that she would put up with the refuse of the rope, the leavings of the cord, or that any analogy could subsist between the knot which binds true lovers and the knot which ties malefactors? I can forgive that pert baggage flirtilla, who, when I complimented her one day on the execution which her eyes had done, replied that, to be sure, Mr. was a judge of those things. But from thy more exalted mind, Celestina, I expected a more unprejudiced decision. The person whose true name I conceal under this appella PG 69 Tian, of all the women that I was ever acquainted with, had the most manly turn of mind, which she had improved by reading and the best conversation. Her understanding was not more masculine than her manners, and whole disposition were delicately and truly feminine. She was the daughter of an officer who had fallen in the service of his country, leaving his widow and Celestina, an only child, with a fortune sufficient to set them above want, but not to enable them to live in splendour. I had the mother's permission to pay my addresses to the young lady, and Celestina seemed to approve of my suit. Often and often have I poured out my overcharged soul in the presence of Celestina, complaining of the hard and unfeeling prejudices of the world, and the sweet maid has again and again declared that no irrational prejudice should hinder her from esteeming every man according to his intrinsic worth. Often has she repeated the consolatory assurance that she could never consider as essentially ignominious an accident, which was indeed to be deprecated, but which might have happened to the most innocent of mankind. Then would she set forth some illustrious example, which her reading easily furnished, of a Phocion or a Socrates unjustly condemned, of a Raleigh or a Sir Thomas More, to whom late posterity had done justice, and by soothing my fancy with some such agreeable parallel, she would make me almost to triumph in my disgrace, and convert my shame into glory. In such entertaining and instructive conversations the time passed on, till I importunately urged the mistress of my affections to name a day for our union. To this she obligingly consented, and I thought myself the happiest of mankind. But how was I surprised one morning on the receipt of the following billet from my charmer. Sir, you must not impute it to levity, or to a worse failing ingratitude if, with anguish of heart, I feel myself compelled by irresistible arguments to recall a vow which I fear I made with too little consideration. I never can be yours. The reasons of my decision, which is final, are in my own breast, and you must everlastingly remain a stranger to them. Assure yourself that I can never cease to esteem you as I ought. Celestina. PG 70. At the sight of this paper, I ran in frantic haste to Celestina's lodgings, where I learned, to my infinite mortification, that the mother and daughter were set off on a journey to a distant part of the country, to visit a relation, and were not expected to return in less than 4 months. Stunned by this blow, which left me without the courage to solicit an explanation by letter, even if I had known where they were, for the particular address was industriously concealed from me, I waited with impatience the termination of the period in the vain hope that I might be permitted to have a chance of softening the harsh decision by a personal interview with Celestina after her return. But before 3 months were at an end, I learned from the newspapers that my beloved had given her hand to another. Heartbroken as I was totally at a loss to account for the strange step which she had taken, and it was not till some years after that I learned the true reason from a female relation of hers, to whom it seems Celestina had confessed in confidence that it was no demerit of mine that had caused her to break off the match so abruptly, nor any preference which she might feel for any other person, for she preferred me, she was pleased to say, to all mankind, but when she came to lay the matter closer to her heart, she found that she never should be able to bear the sight, I give you her very words as they were detailed to me by her relation, the sight of a man in a nightcap who had appeared on a public platform. It would lead to such a disagreeable association of ideas. And to this punctilio I was sacrificed. To pass over an infinite series of minor mortifications, to which this last and heaviest might well render me callous, behold me here, Mr. Editor, in the 37th year of my existence, the 12th reckoning from my reanimation, cut off from all respectable connections, rejected by the fairer half of the community, who in my case alone seem to have laid aside the characteristic pity of their sex, punished because I was once punished unjustly, suffering for no other reason than because I once had the misfortune to suffer without any cause at all. In no other country, I think, but this, could a man have been subject to such a lifelong persecution, when once his innocence had been clearly established. Had I crawled forth a rescued victim from the rack in the PG-71 horrible dungeons of the Inquisition, had I heaved myself up from a half-bastinado in China, or been torn from the just entering, ghastly impaling stake in Barbary, had I dropped alive from the knout in Russia, or come off with a gashed neck from the half-mortal, scarce in time retracted cimeter of an executioneering slave in Turkey, I might have borne about the remnant of this frame, the mangled trophy of reprieved innocence, with credit to myself, in any of those barbarous countries. No scorn, at least, would have mingled with the pity, small as it might be, with which what was left of me would have been surveyed. The singularity of my case has often led me to enquire into the reasons of the general levity with which the subject of hanging is treated as a topic in this country. I say as a topic, for let the very persons who speak so lightly of the thing at a distance be brought to view the real scene, let the platform be bona fide exhibited, and the trembling culprit brought forth, the case is changed. But as a topic of conversation, I appeal to the vulgar jokes which pass current in every street. But why mention them, when the politest authors have agreed in making use of this subject as a source of the ridiculous? Swift and Pope and Prior are fond of recurring to it. Gay has built an entire drama upon this single foundation. The whole interest of the Beggar's Opera may be said to hang upon it. To such writers as Fielding and Smollett it is a perfect bonnybouch. Here the facetious Tom Brown, in his comical view of London and Westminster, described the order of the show at one of the Tyburn executions in his time. Mr. Ordinary visits his melancholy flock in Newgate by 8, doleful procession up Holborn Hill about 11, men handsome and proper that were never thought so before, which is some comfort, however, arrive at the fatal place by 12, burnt brandy, women and Sabbath breaking, repented of. Some few penitential drops fall under the gallows, sheriff's men, parson, pickpockets, criminals all very busy, the last concluding peremptory psalm struck up, show over by 1. In this sportive strain does this misguided wit think proper to play with a subject so serious, which yet he would hardly have done, if he had not known that there existed a predisposition in the habits of his unaccountable countrymen to consider the subject as a jest. But what shall we PG-72 say to Shakespeare, who, not to mention the solution which the gravedigger in Hamlet gives of his fellow workman's problem, in that scene in Measure for Measure, where the clown calls upon Master Barnardine to get up and be hanged, which he declines on the score of being sleepy, has actually gone out of his way to gratify this amiable propensity in his countrymen. For it is plain, from the use that was to be made of his head, and, from a person's asking, is the axe upon the block, sirrah? That beheading and not hanging was the punishment to which Barnardine was destined. But Shakespeare knew that the axe and block were pregnant with no ludicrous images, and therefore falsified the historic truth of his own drama, if I may so speak, rather than he would leave out such excellent matter for a jest, as the suspending of a fellow creature in mid-air has been ever esteemed to be by Englishmen. One reason why the ludicrous never fails to intrude itself into our contemplations upon this mode of death, I suppose to be the absurd posture into which a man is thrown who is condemned to dance, as the vulgar delight to express it, upon nothing. To see him whisking and wavering in the air. To behold the vacant carcase from which the life is newly dislodged, shifting between earth and heaven, the sport of every gust, like a weathercock serving to show from which point the wind blows, like a mockin fit only to scare away birds, like a nest left to swing upon a bough when the bird is flown. These are uses to which we cannot without a mixture of spleen and contempt behold the human carcase reduced. We string up dogs, foxes, bats, moles, weasels. Man surely deserves a steadier death. Another reason why the ludicrous associates more forcibly with this than with any other mode of punishment, I cannot help thinking to be the senseless costume with which old prescription has thought fit to clothe the exit of malefactors in this country. Let a man do what he will to abstract from his imagination all idea of the whimsical, something of it will come across him when he contemplates the figure of a fellow creature in the daytime, in however distressing a situation, in a nightcap, whether it be that this nocturnal edition PG 73 has something discordant with daylight, or that it is the dress which we are seen in at those times when we are seen, as the angel in Milton expresses it, leastwise. This, I am afraid, will always be the case, unless indeed, as in my instance, some strong personal feeling overpower the ludicrous altogether. To me, when I reflect upon the train of misfortunes which have pursued me through life, owing to that accursed drapery, the cap presents as purely frightful an object as the sleeveless yellow coat and devil-painted mitre of the San Benitos. An ancestor of mine who suffered for his loyalty in the time of the civil wars was so sensible of the truth of what I am here advancing, that on the morning of execution no entreaties could prevail upon him to submit to the odious dishabille, as he called it, but he insisted upon wearing, and actually suffered in, the identical flowing periwig which he is painted in the gallery belonging to my uncle's seat in shire. Suffer me, Mr. Editor, before I quit the subject, to say a word or two respecting the minister of justice in this country. In plain words, I mean the hangman. It has always appeared to me that, in the mode of inflicting capital punishments with us, there is too much of the ministry of the human hand. The guillotine, as performing its functions more of itself and sparing human agency, though a cruel and disgusting exhibition in my mind, has many ways the advantage over our way. In beheading, indeed, as it was formerly practised in England, and in whipping to death, as is sometimes practised now, the hand of man is no doubt sufficiently busy, but there is something less repugnant in these downright blows than in the officious barber-like ministerings of the other. To have a fellow with his hangman's hands fumbling about your collar, adjusting the thing as your valet would regulate your cravat, valuing himself on his menial dexterity. I never shall forget meeting my rascal, I mean the fellow who officiated for me, in London last winter. I think I see him now, in a waistcoat that had been mine, smirking along as if he knew me. In some parts of Germany, that fellow's office is by law declared infamous, and his posterity incapable of being ennobled. They have hereditary hangmen, or had at least, in the same manner as they had hereditary other great officers of state, and the hangmen's families of 2 adjoining parishes PG 74 intermarried with each other, to keep the breed entire. I wish something of the same kind were established in England. But it is time to quit a subject which teems with disagreeable images. Permit me to subscribe myself, Mr. Editor, your unfortunate friend, penalties.